I'm Kathy Smith, the director of the Fox Rothschild Center for Law and Society here at Community College of Philadelphia. Today's Perspectives interview is conducted by David Trevaskis, who is an adjunct faculty member here and also the pro bono counsel for the Pennsylvania Bar Association. Mr. Trevaskis is also a member of the Center's advisory board. In today's interview, he speaks to Joseph Sullivan. Mr. Sullivan is an experienced litigator and serves as the pro bono attorney at Pepper Hamilton LLP in Philadelphia. Mr. Sullivan manages Pepper Hamilton's firm-wide pro bono programs, and he's also a national leader on access to justice issues.
Welcome to the Fox Rothschild Center for Law and Society's Perspective series on CCP TV, the educational channel of Community College of Philadelphia. I'm David Trevaskis, adjunct professor in the Paralegal Studies program. Today it is my pleasure to introduce our distinguished guest, Joe Sullivan. Joe, thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you for inviting me.
And Joe, why don't you tell our audience a little bit about what you do?
Sure. I'm a lawyer at a large law firm here in Philadelphia called Pepper Hamilton LLP. My position is called Special Counsel and Director of Pro Bono Programs. What I do is encourage and support all of the lawyers in our 500-plus law firm to do pro bono work. Pro bono work is essentially legal work for individuals and nonprofit organizations who are serving the public good or who otherwise need legal assistance and cannot afford to hire an attorney.
Is this something that all firms, large firms in Philadelphia do?
At this point in time, many, but not all law firms do this work. It's been a process that really began several decades ago, but now has become much more common in the large firms.
Well, it's interesting to me because this is the year we're celebrating the 50th anniversary of Gideon v. Wainwright, which is the case which allows for people to be represented if they're poor. Everybody watching this show knows the television shows where the police say if you can't afford a lawyer, one will be appointed for you. So why is there this need for law firms to do this kind of work?
Okay, well, David, what you're talking about, the right to counsel that was created with the decision by the Supreme Court in Gideon versus Wainwright, applies to individuals who are charged with crimes. So that right applies to individuals who have been charged with a crime and cannot afford to hire a lawyer to represent them in court when the prosecutor proceeds with the case. What we do in the law firms is different. We do pro bono in civil cases. Civil cases are pretty much all matters that are not part of the criminal system. So civil cases would involve things like breach of contract. It could involve personal injury lawsuits, a defense of personal injury lawsuits. It can involve applications for medical benefits, such as Social Security disability benefits, or for other kinds of government supports, food stamps, veterans benefits. A lot of firms now are doing work for veterans who've returned from Iraq and Afghanistan and who have suffered injuries and are in need of benefits either through the Veterans Administration itself or through other government programs.
So there is this need then on the civil side for this kind of help.
Yes.
Aren't we supposed to provide that through the government for all these people?
That's a good question. Lawyers, as part of our professional responsibility, are supposed to promote what we call access to justice. What that really means is that every person who needs to utilize the court system to gain justice should have legal help in doing that. The court system does have a lot of rules, a lot of procedures, a lot of processes that the average person wouldn't know anything about. So legal help is needed in most of those cases. And that's why pro bono exists, because the government may provide programs and supports, but if you can't access them because you don't know how to apply for them or don't know how to demonstrate that you're eligible, then you're not going to get those benefits. And it's the lawyers who are the ones who are trained and able to present your case, working with you, and get you whatever it is that you're entitled to through the court system or through government agencies such as the Social Security Administration or the Veterans Administration.
Now, we do have a civil legal aid network of professional legal aid attorneys. The pro bono work that you're talking about supplements their work.
That's right. We have a very extensive network, as you've called it, and it is a network of public interest law centers. Actually, we have 33 public interest law centers in Philadelphia, and they all work very cooperatively. In fact, I co-chair a committee of the Philadelphia Bar Association called the Delivery of Legal Services Committee. That committee is basically a coalition of all of these public interest law centers who work together to provide as broad a safety net as possible for people in need. Where the law firms come in is when those agencies, which are in some cases quite small, get requests for help that they don't have the staff to handle, they then refer those cases out to large firms like mine and several others through a screening process in which they interview the person seeking help. They determine whether they have a legal need and are financially qualified for free work, that is pro bono work, and if the person or persons qualify, they get referred to one of our large firms, and then we represent them.
So I can't just call Pepper Hamilton up and say, is Joe Sullivan there? Can he take my case?
Right. Actually, I do get a few calls like that. I also get emails and other inquiries. But the process is that we do not take the cases directly at the law firms. And that's the reason for that is something I just mentioned. In order to qualify for pro bono legal assistance, you need to, number one, have a real legal problem, as opposed to a social services problem or some other problem that doesn't involve a legal issue. And your income has to be very low. It has to be below generally about 150% of what are called the federal poverty guidelines. That's a very low threshold. So the reason we at the law firms do not take clients directly is because we're not able to do that kind of intake and pre-qualification. That's what the public interest law centers are there to do. And they have lawyers who can analyze the problem that the person comes in with to determine if it is a legal problem or some other kind of problem, and then redirect them, if it's not a legal problem, to someone else who can help them. And they determine if they qualify financially. So once the person who comes in passes those two tests, if you will, then that law center will send that case and others like it out, often on a list of cases that we get at our firm over the internet, a case list. And then we look at cases on the list. That's part of what I do. I review those lists when they come in. I determine which cases I think our lawyers are best able to handle. And then we have to do something called a conflicts check. We have to make sure that if we're going to help somebody who comes in as a pro bono client, that he or she or they are not suing our law firm in another matter, because that would create something that we call a conflict of interest. So we have to do that conflict of interest check. The vast majority of our pro bono clients don't have conflicts, but we do still have to do that exercise. Once we've done that, I then select the lawyers in the firm to do the work. Generally, we have a young lawyer handling the case under the supervision of a more experienced lawyer who is assigned the role of being the supervisor or mentor to the young lawyer handling the case. Actually, I'm happy to say that our young lawyers are really outstanding lawyers already, from experience they've had in law school clinics and otherwise, and we provide tremendous support. Most of our programs are ones for which we've already had a training of our young lawyers by the related public interest law center. So these lawyers are already trained in this area of law, but what they don't have is experience. That's why you need the mentor, the supervising lawyer. They have experience. And what young lawyers need is experience. They've got the knowledge, they've got the training, but they need the experience. So that's why we are delighted when we can to do pro bono work, because I often call it a win-win situation. It's a win for the client who needs legal help and could not access the justice system without help. And it's a win for us because our young lawyers are trained in skills and perspectives that they need for all the work they do, not just the pro bono work, but for their fee work. The other big benefit is, there's just nothing like helping a person succeeding and helping somebody with a real need. When we get somebody into a home or we keep them in their home, we prevent the foreclosure that a bank is seeking to enforce on a homeowner, or if we keep a tenant in his or her apartment, when they have a legitimate complaint about the apartment and therefore have withheld some of their rent until the problem gets fixed. When we keep people in their homes, we feel tremendous sense of personal satisfaction. We feel like we've made a difference in their lives, and hopefully we have.
It's interesting. I'm sure people watching at home are surprised to hear a large law firm having such a focus on helping the poor. Pepper Hamilton is in the business of law to make money for Pepper Hamilton. How does it justify this kind of commitment, and how big is the commitment? You say that you get cases, you refer them to lawyers. Is every lawyer at Pepper doing this?
Almost every lawyer. Close to 90% of our associates, those are the younger lawyers, do pro bono, and that percentage has been growing every year. Our partners are also committed to pro bono. Years ago, partners tended to have a hands-off attitude towards pro bono, let the younger lawyers do it. Now they're very, very involved. In fact, last year, our firm, in the last 2 years, I've been putting a focus on getting our partners more involved, and I'm happy to report that last year, our total pro bono hours firm-wide increased by about 7,000 hours, and 80% of that increase was partner participation in pro bono projects.
And so if you've just increased your hours 7,000 over the past year, what's the total hours for the firm that is donated in pro bono service?
For firm-wide, we have 12 offices, by the way, so the figures I use are firm-wide.
So this is not just Philadelphia?
Not just Philadelphia.
Now, is Philadelphia your biggest office?
Yes. About 70% of our lawyers are in Philadelphia, but we also have offices in cities like Boston, New York, Washington, D.C., and Pittsburgh, Harrisburg, and other places. But last year, our total pro bono hours were 29,000 hours firm-wide.
But that's a huge donation. And you're saying other big firms in Philadelphia are doing that too.
Correct.
And Pepper in the rank of firms is not the biggest by any means.
No, we are not. We have 520 lawyers, but there are now what are often called mega firms, which have thousands of lawyers, 2,000, 3,000, and have offices across the globe. We have 12 offices. They're all in the United States. But many other firms, including some of the bigger Philadelphia firms, have offices in Europe, Asia, South America, around the globe, basically.
But you're saying most of them are doing this kind of work as well?
Correct.
So it's amazing to think what would happen if you weren't doing this work.
Yeah, that's the scary part, because we talked earlier about the legal services agencies, the wonderful legal services agencies, the 33 that we have here. Their lawyers are outstanding, they're highly qualified, and they're dedicated to what they do. But unfortunately, they do rely on government funding and private funding, contributions from generous foundations, from corporations, and from individuals. And a lot of that funding from all of those sources has declined in recent years because of the economic problems we've had in this country. So with the decline in funding for the legal services agencies, it's been even more important that the law firms try to make up at least some of that difference by doing more pro bono every year, and we are doing that.
Now, how do the clients of the firm, the ones who are paying, feel that some poor person is getting the services they're paying for free?
Well, actually, they're very pleased about it. Because first of all, keep in mind that the work that we do for our large fee clients is very different. It doesn't overlap in almost any way with the work we do for poor clients, low income, disabled, elderly people. Those folks, their average income is very low, obviously, by definition, whereas our large fee clients are often multinational corporations. We represent a wide range of businesses. We have a number of what are called Fortune 500 clients. They can afford our services, and they want us to do something very different than what we do in the pro bono world. And we do that, and we like to think we do that well. But they, like everybody else, wants to feel that they're making a contribution to the greater good and to access to justice. So they want us to be doing pro bono. And now many of these large corporate clients, when they send out what are called RFPs, which stands for Request for Proposals, when they're going out to the legal world and saying, tell us why we should hire your law firm to do our work, many of those RFPs say, by the way, tell us what commitment you have to the rest of society. What kind of pro bono work are you? Do you have a commitment to pro bono? What kind of work do you do? At what level do you do it? How many of your partners do pro bono work? They want to know that not because they're going to get involved in any way in that pro bono, but they feel that it's part of their corporate social responsibility to use law firms that recognize the need and seek to make access to justice more available to a larger portion of the society.
Can you tell us about a case or maybe a couple cases that show exactly what your lawyers are doing at Pepper to help the poor here in Philadelphia?
Absolutely. I'll tell you one example of a case that I handled a number of years ago where I met a homeless veteran who was 70 years old, who was living under a bridge because his landlord at the time evicted him and everybody else in his building so that the building could be rehabilitated and turned into a commercial building. He was elderly, in need of medication, had lost his medical card, and now was homeless. So what we did for him was we met with him several times to find out what his needs were, and over time we helped him apply for what's called supplemental security income benefits because he had no regular income. And I had to prove that he was disabled, and he clearly was, but we went through an application and a hearing to prove to the Social Security Administration that he was in fact disabled and could not work. We did that. Then he began getting Social Security or SSI benefits. And then we had to find him a place to live. And we did a lot of searching, and eventually we were able to find him a unit in a government-built building that was a combination of, it was a sort of reserved, half of the building was reserved for retired postal workers, and the other half of the building, the units were reserved to people who had at least 2 qualifying disabilities. My client had those 2 qualifying disabilities. He was also a veteran, and so we were able to get him a home. The first apartment he'd had real apartment he had many years. He had in fact been living in a single room at the time he was evicted. So we got him a step up, if you will, into a building with a real apartment with a kitchen and a living room and a dining room. And he was so pleased. And he had been living on the street and had a lot of homeless friends. He told me he would give, each month he would give a small part of his SSI check to all these other homeless people as a gesture of friendship. But I felt very good about that because in my view, that gentleman would not have survived another 6 months on the street. He just was too old, too frail, too sickly. So that's one example. We also do things in what I call practice groups. So we have one of our many practice groups is called the Untitled Chapter Practice Group. In Philadelphia, a lot of people live in small houses called row homes, and sometimes they're the 3rd or 4th generation in that home. And they are the de facto homeowners, they live there, but they don't have that piece of paper called title that qualifies them to be the legal owner of the property.
We probably have people watching this show today who are the children, the grandchildren, the great-grandchildren of the people who originally bought the home and had that deed.
Right.
And so you're saying if you haven't done anything with that deed for 3 or 4 generations, there can be problems?
The problem can be that at this point in time, you may need a new roof on your house. You may need new plumbing. You may need other repairs. And if you're low income or disabled or elderly, you may not have the funds to do that. Well, luckily, there are grant programs from government and other sources that can get you a small amount of money, $2,000 or $3,000 in some cases, which could be enough to put a new roof on your row home or to repair your plumbing or to get other kinds of benefits. But there's one requirement for all of those programs. You have to have that piece of paper, the title. You have to have what's called clear title to the home.
So I can't just, even if I kept the deed from great-granddaddy Trevaskis, that doesn't help me.
Does not help you. It has to be in your name. And if there are any liens on the property from prior generations, you have to get those addressed. So what we basically do is we go through a process in which we get the title document in the name of the client, and if there are liens on the property, we'll work out payment plans or loan forgiveness so that they have clear title. And once they have clear title, they can apply for funds from any number of sources to fix the roof, to fix the plumbing, put a new floor in, whatever, and stay in their home. And that's the last part is extremely important because a lot of people want to keep these folks in their home. Obviously, they want to stay there, but the city of Philadelphia wants to protect neighborhoods and preserve communities, so it wants us to do that as well. So it's a group effort, if you will, and we do a number of them. We have a number of lawyers. All the pro bono work they do is focused on what we call tangled title.
And so somebody in the city finds out about these problems, shoots them to you. You get your lawyers
The
to work
somebody
on it?
is the Philadelphia VIP program, one of our largest and most effective, what we call public interest intake and referral centers. They do the intake, they get their cases from other law centers and from individuals, they analyze them, and then they send them on to us.
So how many of these tangled titles would Pepper have done in the past year?
Probably about 16, which may not sound like a lot, but these are complicated cases. We have to go back several generations and untangle the title. We have to find out who really had the title in the 1940s. Very often the title holder is deceased now. And so that creates other issues because there may be a will that was never probated, or it may not be clear what the intention of that person was as to who would get the home next. So a lot of this is akin to private investigation. We go out and research the property, all the potential owners, and then we go out and contact them all. Often they live in other parts of the country. And they say, you mean I have a half interest in this house on Cuthbert Street? I had no idea. I forgot all about it. I will sign something called a quitclaim deed and give my interest to my brother, who does live there. And then the brother, instead of being a 50% owner, can become a 100% owner. Then we can get the title in his name, work out any payment plans if we need to do that for liens, hopefully. And then they qualify for the grants and loans that really are essential to their staying there. Mm-hmm. We worry about folks in these homes because if they can't get that level, if they can't get the new roof or the plumbing, the house quickly becomes uninhabitable and they have to move anyway. And they often don't have a place to go to because they're elderly, they're disabled, they've been living on a pension for 25 years, whatever, any number of possibilities. So our goal is to help them as individuals and to help preserve neighborhoods and communities all across the city through that program.
That's an amazing thing, because the other piece of that is if they don't have to move out of that house and the house doesn't become debilitated, that the neighborhood is held together much better.
Exactly. And very often, if they are in the house, they don't become homeless. They don't then have to call upon the government for other kinds of income supports, which they need because they're homeless instead of having a home. The other important part of this is it all relates to education, because a lot of folks have young children, and if they're at risk of losing their home or having to live in a shelter, that is very damaging to the educational process for their children. It's very disruptive. So one of the other benefits of this program is to help families stay where they are, keep their kids in the schools, in their neighborhoods, with their friends and their teachers. So we like to think that this kind of work has ripple effects that are beneficial. We not only keep the person in their home, we keep them. They're able to keep their jobs if they work down the street and don't own a car. So that because if they become homeless, they may lose their jobs. So we keep them in the neighborhood. We help them keep their jobs. We help their kids stay in the local schools. There's a lot of benefits to this kind of neighborhood preservation work, which is really what it is.
So you have really a wide range of opportunities. Other things that your firm has done that might be interesting to the people at home watching?
Sure. We represent a number of senior citizens through another public interest law center called the Senior Law Center. We have a lot of seniors in Philadelphia. In fact, Philadelphia has a higher percentage of seniors than many of the other largest cities in the country. And many of them live in a home where they and their spouse paid the mortgage off 15 years ago and they're just living on a small pension. Sadly, there are a certain number of what I'll call renegade contractors who go out to these neighborhoods and try to convince these elderly and vulnerable people to put a new roof on the house even if they don't need it, or to redo the sidewalks because they don't look as nice as they did 20 years ago, whatever. And they get them to sign contracts, and the charges that they make are way beyond what the market would normally charge. But because the elderly person has been alone or isolated for a long time, they don't know what the going rate is for a new roof or plumbing or a new kitchen. And they sign these contracts. Then, sad to say, these contractors then do some of the work and they just walk away. And then they've signed a contract which enables them to, if the senior then stops paying because the work hasn't been done, then they can sue them. And so you signed a contract, and by the way, you missed 2 payments on your thing, so now your interest rate on your contract goes from 3% to 28%. And all kinds of unfortunate, unscrupulous consequences ensue. Now, I'm not saying this is true of all contractors. We also work with some wonderful contractors who give us advice on what is right what is the right way to do it and what a fair price is. But sad to say, there are a certain number of these unscrupulous contractors sort of trolling the neighborhoods. And so when the seniors get in trouble, when this sort of thing happens, they call the Senior Law Center on their hotline or otherwise. Senior Law Center sends some of those cases over to Pepper Hamilton, and we have teams who go after. Basically, we first write letters, and then if necessary, we go to court. We contact the contractors, and we tell them we're representing Mrs. Smith or Mr. Doe, and you did work on that property 6 months ago. You never came back. You started the bathroom. You did one part of it, and the other rest is a broken wall. Why haven't you finished the project? And they go, oh, it's amazing. Very often when you contact them, they suddenly are able to come back and do it right. So often we just basically get them to do what they were supposed to do in the first place. But in some cases, they do a really shoddy job. They finish the job, but it starts breaking apart 2 months later because they didn't use trained or qualified workers, or they just weren't willing to invest the time and hard work that it takes to do the job right. So if we can't get them to correct the problem, we will sometimes get one of the many great contractors here to go in and do it properly, and then we bill the contractor. And if they don't pay, we'll take them to court.
Wow, it really sounds wonderful, and it sounds like people in Philadelphia have a huge advantage because we do have so many large law firms like Pepper Hamilton that do this kind of work. Is the answer pro bono? Is that the answer to our civil legal aid crisis?
Unfortunately, it's only a part of the answer. Pro bono is a part of the answer. But what we really, even with all of the great work that I think our firm and the other firms are doing, the experts, not me, say that we're probably only helping about 20% of the people who really need legal assistance but can't afford it.
So if somebody's lucky and they get the Pepper Hamilton person, they've had a wonderful experience. But if you're in the 80%,
you just can't get the kind of services you need. Now, where another place where that, one way that we are trying statewide to make a difference on that is with what we call the Civil Gideon Task Force. I think we talked at the beginning about criminal Gideon, that is the right of criminal defendants to get a court-appointed lawyer. We are now working on an effort statewide through the Pennsylvania Bar Association, the Philadelphia Bar Association, the judges all across the state, but especially here in Philadelphia in what's called the First Judicial District. We are working to promote something that we call a right to counsel in areas of fundamental civil need. So that doesn't mean a right to counsel for all persons who have civil legal problems. We're talking about a very specific subset of that, which is people who are faced with losing their home, either through mortgage foreclosure or eviction if they're tenants in an apartment, people who are facing loss of access to their children because of custody disputes, divorce, custody disputes, and people with certain kinds of serious health problems who can't seem to get access to the healthcare system. And what we are arguing and what we are promoting is a new view of the right to counsel that goes beyond just the criminal matters, which are extremely important, for which we're celebrating the 50th anniversary of Gideon versus Wainwright right now. We're trying to go from that system in the criminal courts into a system where there are certain fundamental civil needs that need to be met, and to get the courts and the government eventually, over time, to recognize that there should be a similar right to counsel in those fundamental areas.
It really does sound like a worthy mission, and one that I hope as we move forward, maybe 50 years from now, they'll be celebrating the Civil Gideon anniversary.
Right, that would be great.
It would be great. That's all the time we do have now, and I want to thank you for being my guest, and I want to thank everyone for joining us today, and to thank you for tuning in. You have been watching the Fox Rothschild Center for Law and Society's Perspective series on CCP TV, the educational channel of Community College of Philadelphia. I'm David Trevaskis, adjunct professor in the Paralegal Studies program. For more information, please contact us at the college, and we will see you next time on CCP TV.